At exactly 4 a.m., when most of the world was still drowned in silence, the sound of gunfire cracked the night in Burkina Faso's capital. For ordinary families, it was another moment of fear. Mothers held their children close. Farmers who had risen early to prepare for the day froze in their steps. It wasn't the sound of celebration or ceremony. It was the unmistakable rhythm of violence. That night, a convoy carrying President Ibrahim Traoré's most trusted bodyguard was ambushed. This man was not simply a soldier. He was a brother in arms, a shield who had stood beside Traoré in every trial since the young captain rose to power. To attack him was more than an act of war. It was a message, a warning, and perhaps an attempt to break the very heart of Burkina Faso. Traoré himself was far from the ambush site, but news traveled quickly. A coded call came through, and within minutes he was on his feet. His men armed themselves, vehicles roared to life, and the president himself stepped into the front seat of the lead truck. He whispered only one line: "Whoever touches my brother will answer to me." But this story is about more than one midnight rescue. It is about the fragility of a nation caught between enemies without and traitors within. It is about how one night of bloodshed can echo across villages, markets, parliaments, and even foreign capitals thousands of miles away. For the people of Burkina Faso, this attack was not an isolated event. It was a reminder that safety is never guaranteed, not even for those closest to power. For an American audience, it may feel distant, but the lessons are not. Instability in one corner of Africa can ripple outward, reshaping trade, migration, and security far beyond its borders. So let us walk through that night. The ambush, the defiance, the rescue, and then the larger question that lingers still. If leaders can be struck in the dark, who will protect the people in the light? The attack began with shadows. At first, there was only the whisper of tires rolling over gravel. Then, without warning, a burst of gunfire tore through the convoy's lead vehicle. Masked men emerged from alleys, rifles raised, moving with precision that betrayed training. These were not petty criminals. They were professionals, armed and organized, sent with a single purpose: to strike at the shield of the president. Inside one of the trucks, the bodyguard, a man who had spent years at Traoré's side, reacted instantly. He wasn't just defending himself. He was defending the bond of loyalty that had held Burkina Faso's fragile leadership together. As bullets ricocheted off steel and glass, he pushed open the door and fought back. He took down one attacker, then another. His fists struck like iron, his courage burning even as wounds opened across his body. The men around him shouted orders in the darkness. Grenades hissed. Tires burned. The smell of gunpowder spread across the narrow road. Civilians living nearby awoke in terror. Children clutching blankets, their parents whispering prayers that the violence would not spill into their homes. For them, it was not just the president's bodyguard fighting for survival. It was a symbol that even those at the center of power were vulnerable. Back at Traoré's camp, the coded call came in. His aide whispered the unthinkable: "They have him. Your shield is under attack." The room froze, but only for a second. Traoré rose with a fury that left no space for hesitation. He gave no speeches, no explanations. His command was simple: prepare the vehicles. We move now. Engines roared in the silence of the night. Soldiers rushed to arm themselves. The convoy rolled out, headlights cutting through the mist. Traoré himself sat in the front, jaw tight, eyes burning. For him, this was not just about one man. It was about sending a message back. We will not break. Not tonight. Not ever. By the time Traoré's men reached the ambush site, the battle was raging. The bodyguard, already bloodied, had managed to hold off 3 attackers. His shirt was soaked, his breathing ragged, yet when he saw the familiar shape of the lead truck emerge through smoke and fire, his lips curled into a faint smile. Relief, loyalty, and defiance all in one fleeting expression. The president himself leapt into the fight. Witnesses later described the moment as surreal. The head of state, rifle in hand, stepping directly into the line of fire. His presence shifted the tide. Soldiers charged forward. Explosions lit up the night. The attackers, once confident, began to scatter like rats chased from the shadows. One of the insurgents tried to flee, darting through an alley. Traoré raised his weapon and fired a single shot. The man fell, silence swallowing his escape. The battle, brutal and brief, was over. But the cost was clear. On the dirt road lay the president's shield, barely conscious, his life hanging by a thread. Traoré knelt beside him, catching him before he collapsed fully. His voice trembled, not with fear, but with an unshakable vow. "You will not die tonight, not while I breathe." Medics rushed in, working under the stars. Bandages wrapped the wounds. Oxygen flowed into weakened lungs. For a moment, silence gripped the soldiers who surrounded the scene. Then, as the bodyguard's chest rose again with a faint but steady rhythm, a wave of relief swept through them. He had survived, yet the meaning of that survival was heavier than any battlefield victory. This was no random ambush. It was calculated, designed to shake the confidence of a nation already battling drought, poverty, and insurgency. If the enemy could strike at the president's closest protector, what message did that send to farmers, shopkeepers, or students across Burkina Faso? And for the soldiers who stood in that dirt road at 4 a.m., the answer was clear. This was not just an attempt on one man's life. It was an attempt on the spirit of the revolution itself. The battlefield quieted, but only on the surface. The night air still carried the acrid smell of smoke and gunpowder. Soldiers stood in silence, their boots pressing into the dirt where minutes earlier bullets had torn through the darkness. At the center of it all, Ibrahim Traoré knelt beside his fallen comrade, his hand gripping the man's shoulder as if sheer willpower could keep him tethered to life. The medics worked furiously, bandages stained red within seconds. An oxygen mask covered the soldier's face. Each shallow breath was a battle. The men around him held their weapons tighter, as if anger alone could shield their brother. When the faint rise of his chest finally steadied, the silence broke. Soldiers erupted in cheers of relief. Some wept openly, others raised their rifles skyward. The message was clear. He had survived, for now. But Traoré's eyes told a different story. His gaze was not only on the man lying before him. It was fixed on the shadows beyond the firelight. This was not just an ambush. It was a warning shot in a larger war. Someone had wanted him weakened. Someone had calculated that by striking the shield, they might pierce the heart. By dawn, the news spread. In Ouagadougou, whispers turned into rumors. Radios buzzed with speculation. Who had dared to launch such an attack? Some said jihadist fighters linked to Al-Qaeda. Others whispered of foreign hands, of shadowy backers who preferred Africa in chaos rather than in control of its own destiny. In the markets, women trading sorghum clutched their children tighter. Farmers on the edge of the city shook their heads. "If the president's guard can be struck, what about us?" one man asked aloud. The streets filled with anger as much as fear. Hundreds gathered outside military barracks, chanting support for the soldiers, demanding revenge. Social media flared with hashtags, "We stand with Traoré." Messages of defiance crossed borders, spilling into Mali, Niger, and Guinea. The Sahel, already a tinderbox, felt the spark ignite. Within the presidential compound, Traoré addressed his men. His voice carried like thunder through the packed courtyard. "They tried to strike fear in us," he declared, "but tonight we strike back with justice." His words were not polished by speechwriters. They were raw, forged in anger and loyalty. The soldiers roared in response, fists raised, the ground shaking beneath their chant. Yet, behind the display of strength, lingered a dangerous truth. This was not only a military matter. It was political. It was psychological. Whoever orchestrated the attack understood that the image of vulnerability can do more damage than bullets. To see the leader's shield bleed was to remind every citizen that no one is untouchable. Internationally, reactions trickled in. Some African leaders expressed solidarity, framing the attack as an assault on sovereignty itself. Others stayed silent, wary of aligning too closely with Traoré's defiance of foreign powers. In Western capitals, the incident was mentioned only briefly in newswires, overshadowed by domestic headlines. But within intelligence circles, alarms rang. If the president of Burkina Faso could nearly lose his closest protector in a midnight ambush, what did that say about the country's stability? And what might follow if the spiral continued? Meanwhile, inside a field hospital, lit by flickering bulbs, the bodyguard clung to life. Nurses moved swiftly, Doctors murmured orders, and outside the tent, soldiers kept vigil. Traoré remained at his side, refusing to leave. For hours he sat in silence, his presence alone an anchor. At last, the wounded man stirred. His eyes flickered open, and with a weak smile he whispered, "Don't let them win." Traoré clasped his hand, his voice steady as stone. "They will not escape. I promise you." It was a vow not only to his comrade but to his nation, to the farmers who feared for their children, to the soldiers who had risked their lives in the dirt road, to the millions of Burkinabè who looked to him not merely as a captain, but as a symbol that their country's spirit would not bow. But vows carry weight, and promises in the Sahel are not made lightly. As evening approached again, intelligence arrived at Traoré's desk. Names, hideouts, proof of foreign backers whispered in code. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. The attackers had revealed themselves. The captain rose from his chair, eyes burning with determination. He gave the order quietly, but every man in the room felt the gravity. "Prepare the operation. Tonight, we answer." Outside, soldiers readied their weapons in silence. Engines rumbled once more. The night that had begun with betrayal was about to end with reckoning. The world would soon learn that to strike at Ibrahim Traoré's shield was to declare war on the captain himself. And war, history has shown, is something he never loses. The night of the ambush did not end at the battlefield. Its echoes rolled into every corner of Burkina Faso, shaping conversations in markets, churches, mosques, and homes. What began as an assault on one man's protector quickly grew into a question about the nation's survival. In the capital, Ouagadougou, the morning after felt heavy. Shopkeepers opened their stalls slowly, eyes darting toward passing trucks of armed soldiers. Mothers walking their children to school whispered anxiously with neighbors. Some chose to keep their children at home, fearing more attacks. The sound of gunfire at 4 a.m. had been brief, but the fear it planted was lasting. In rural villages, word of the ambush spread by radio. Farmers gathering for work in parched fields shook their heads in disbelief. "If they can strike the president's guard," one farmer said, "then what is left to protect us?" His wife, standing nearby, added quietly, "We sleep with one ear open now. We do not know if safety still exists." This was the civilian toll, not in bodies counted, but in trust eroded. For ordinary Burkinabè, security has always been fragile. Attacks on villages in the Sahel have killed thousands over the past decade. More than 2 million people are already displaced, living in makeshift camps without steady food or water. The ambush against Traoré's shield was another reminder that the storm of violence spares no one. Politically, the implications were immediate. Traoré's government had built its legitimacy on promises of sovereignty and strength. To some, his presence on the battlefield reinforced that promise, a leader willing to fight alongside his men. To others, it raised unsettling questions. If enemies could get so close, had the state lost control of its own capital? Opposition voices, though often silenced in Burkina Faso's tense political climate, murmured that the ambush proved foreign powers or domestic rivals still had their hands in the country's affairs. Rumors of betrayal circulated, each one feeding a deeper mistrust of elites, soldiers, and even neighbors. The African Union convened emergency consultations. Mali and Niger, Burkina Faso's allies in the Sahel alliance, declared public solidarity, framing the attack as an assault not just on one leader, but on the regional project of independence. Yet even within those supportive statements was a shared anxiety. If this could happen in Ouagadougou, it could happen in Bamako or Niamey tomorrow. Among civilians, another kind of reaction was stirring. Not only fear, but determination. In the Revolution Square, thousands gathered, waving flags and chanting slogans. They were not simply rallying for revenge, they were calling for dignity. "We are not afraid," a young student shouted through a loudspeaker. "If they touch one of us, they touch all of us." His words echoed across the square, carried by the rhythm of drums and the roar of voices. Still, beneath the chants lay a quieter, heavier question. Who was truly behind the ambush? For many Burkinabè, the answer seemed obvious. It had to be more than local militants. The precision, the timing, the choice of target, It all suggested larger hands. Some pointed to jihadist groups with links to foreign funding. Others whispered of Western intelligence agencies, unwilling to see Burkina Faso break from old alliances. The lack of clear answers left the nation suspended between defiance and paranoia. In private homes, families wrestled with the uncertainty. Sarah, a textile worker in Ouagadougou, told her children the story of the ambush in a different way. "The captain's guard did not fall," she said. "He stood until the morning came. We too must stand." Her story was less about soldiers and guns and more about endurance. For her family, like millions of others, hope was as vital as food or water. Traoré, aware of both the fear and the expectations swelling in his country, spoke again days later. He reminded the people that Burkina Faso's struggle was not only against bullets, but against doubt. "They want us to believe we are weak," he declared in a national address. "But we are not weak. We are alive, and as long as we stand together, we cannot be broken." The words carried weight, yet everyone knew speeches alone could not seal the cracks. Security checkpoints multiplied across the capital. Armed patrols moved more frequently through the countryside. Rumors persisted that more attacks were planned. The air itself felt charged, heavy with anticipation. The ambush had failed to kill its target, but it had succeeded in its deeper aim, to remind every citizen that danger lurked closer than they wished to believe. And as intelligence pointed to names and hideouts, one question grew louder. Would Traoré's promise to justice bring security or ignite a wider fire? While Burkina Faso was still counting its wounds, the world was watching. Some with concern, others with calculation. In Washington, the incident was noted in intelligence briefings. Analysts debated what the ambush meant. Was it the work of jihadist insurgents expanding their reach, or was it a warning from rival powers unhappy with Traoré's defiance of Western influence? The questions mattered because instability in the Sahel rarely stays confined. It spills outward, into migration flows, into global markets, into security challenges that cross oceans. For older Americans, this moment might echo memories of the Cold War, when small nations became the battlegrounds of larger rivalries. The ambush of a bodyguard in Ouagadougou may seem like a minor skirmish, but history teaches that such sparks can ignite wider fires. Already, U.S. forces in Africa, nearly 6,000 personnel across multiple bases, were reassessing their security posture. A single miscalculation in places like Niger or Burkina Faso could drag America deeper into conflicts most citizens know little about. In Europe, the alarm was even sharper. Leaders in Paris, Berlin, and Rome worried that further instability in Burkina Faso would accelerate migration across the Mediterranean. They have seen before how unrest in Africa translates into waves of desperate families, boarding boats, some arriving safely, others lost at sea. For Africa itself, the reactions were mixed. Some governments voiced solidarity, fearing that an attack on Traoré foreshadowed threats to their own leaders. Others stayed quiet, cautious of antagonizing the hidden forces behind the ambush. But among ordinary Africans, from Mali to Guinea, the sentiment was clear. If Burkina Faso stands, we stand with them. For the United States, the ambush raises a sobering question. Can it afford to ignore these struggles, or does indifference risk greater consequences down the road? Because when a nation like Burkina Faso fights for survival, the ripple effects of war, displacement, and extremism have a way of reaching even the safest suburbs thousands of miles away. The world may view the attack as just another headline, but for those paying attention, it signals something deeper. A storm is building in the Sahel, and whether America chooses to engage or step back, that storm will not wait. The ambush at 4 a.m. did not break Burkina Faso. The bodyguard lived. The president stood tall. Soldiers rallied, and for a brief moment, hope itself seemed to have survived the night. But in truth, the battle is only beginning. That single attack revealed a deeper truth. Security in Burkina Faso is fragile, not just for its leaders, but for every farmer, trader, and child. A convoy ambushed in the capital is more than a military event. It is a warning that enemies can strike at will, and that the struggle for sovereignty is far from over. For Ibrahim Traoré, the night's events carried a heavy lesson. Leadership in the Sahel is not measured only by speeches or policies. It is measured by whether people believe he can protect them when shadows move in the dark. That belief is now on trial. Looking ahead, the months to come may bring escalation. Intelligence already whispers of new threats. Retaliation campaigns are being prepared. Alliances with neighbors, Mali, Niger, Guinea, will be tested under fire. Foreign powers, too, are recalibrating. Some may seek to undermine Traoré further, while others may quietly strengthen his hand, hoping to contain instability. For the United States and its allies, the foresight is sobering. Within 3 to 6 months, 2 paths seem possible. The first, Burkina Faso succeeds in turning this moment of crisis into unity, using the failed ambush as proof of resilience. The second, repeated strikes erode public trust, feeding fear, migration, and a widening security vacuum that others will rush to fill. And so, the question remains, what does it mean for America when a nation thousands of miles away struggles at dawn to hold itself together? Do we dismiss it as distant chaos? Or do we recognize that in a world of fragile borders and global consequences, their struggle may one day reach our own doorstep? At 4 a.m., they tried to kill hope in Burkina Faso. They failed. The sun still rose. But whether tomorrow's dawn will bring peace or fire is a question no one can yet answer. The story of that night is not just about bullets and blood. It is about the fragile heartbeat of a nation. And it leaves us with a choice. Will we look away, or will we listen to what 4 a.m. in Burkina Faso is trying to tell the world?